So today I want to talk about insulin resistance. It's quite an important topic to look at. There's a lot of people that struggle with it. Some people don't even know that they're struggling with it. And it's something we should be addressing as soon as possible. So first off, what is insulin resistance? So insulin resistance is actually quite interesting. So what happens in the body when you eat carbohydrates? So things like bread or pasta or fruit, or quinoa or whatever carbohydrate you eat, it gets metabolized into glucose, which then enters the bloodstream. As soon as that glucose enters the bloodstream, it then has to get out of the bloodstream into the body's cells. So think your brain cells, your liver cells, and your muscle cells, so that you can do all the activities you need to do every day. Now, there's something we need for that sugar to move out of the blood into the cells, and that is called a hormone, insulin. So insulin is released by the pancreas as soon as it senses there's glucose in the blood. And then happily the sugar moves, or the glucose moves from the bloodstream into the cells. So that's in a happy, normal body. But unfortunately, when there's insulin resistance, there's more insulin being released because the cell's receptors aren't as sensitive to the insulin anymore, which means that the glucose isn't moving into the cells very effectively. What then happens is the blood sugar levels start to rise, and then the body actually starts to go into an adaptive phase, almost, if you want to say that, where it then takes that sugar and stores it as fat, usually around the waist area. So unfortunately, what causes insulin resistance is our diet has a massive role to play. Yes, genetic factors and so forth also play a role, but diet actually has a very big role to play. So when we look at things that actually increase your risk for insulin resistance, we think of things that are high GI carbohydrates and very refined carbohydrates, because these carbs actually release their sugar very quickly into the blood. So there's a lot of sugar in the blood at one moment in time, which leads to a lot of insulin that needs to be released. When there's a lot of insulin that needs to be released, or when there's a lot of insulin in the blood, the cells actually get more insulin resistant. Okay, so it's important to remember that the more sugar in the blood, the more insulin resistant the body will become. Now, unfortunately, we can also then look at things that like portion sizes, because if you're only eating healthy carbohydrates, that's low GI, and also not refined and natural, but you're having very big portions, there's still going to be a lot of carbohydrates in the blood, which then leads to more insulin being released. So it is important to look at the type of carbohydrate as well as the portion size. So this doesn't mean that I'm saying that we should all go low carb, because carbohydrates are important, and we've made videos on this in the past, so please check that out if you're not sure. Other things that also can influence insulin sensitivity is exercise. Exercise increases the sensitivity, so it's good to be exercising and being active. Saturated fat also might be decreasing insulin sensitivity, so it's actually quite detrimental if you're having high saturated fat. Think animal products with high carbs, that's high GI and very refined. That combination is not great for insulin resistance. Then there's another thing that also is super important, which people often forget about, and that is our stress levels. So especially now, we're stressing excessively because of the pandemic and the third wave, and economically it's going quite rough with a lot of people. So stress is actually increasing in a lot of people, which leads to an increase in cortisol. Cortisol is a hormone that's released by your adrenal glands, and it's basically just for us to survive. We need cortisol. It's as if you think of being chased by a lion. Your body is releasing cortisol to get you going and to get you running and focused and just get to the end goal. So now we're not being chased by a lion, of course, but stress levels are basically causing the same effect in the body. When there's more cortisol in the body than actually we need, we see that also has an effect on the insulin resistance, as well as fat being stored around the stomach area. Why is that? Because we see that cortisol actually breaks down protein and transforms it into glucose, which then leads to more glucose being in the blood, which then leads to that insulin resistance that I've just spoken about. So we see with high cortisol levels a lot of fat around the abdomen, with quite skinny legs. I don't know if you have seen that, or maybe you're suffering with that, and that might be high cortisol levels, and that's also actually affecting your how you can lose weight and your insulin resistance. So another thing that's also super important to think about, and this is it's quite something that people often do wrong, is caffeine. We think caffeine is a stimulant, which is going to increase my metabolism, which is going to burn fat. And yes, to an extent it will, but excessive amount of caffeine on top of a high cortisol level because of stress is just aggravating the whole situation, because caffeine, because it's a stimulant, it also stimulates the adrenals to release more adrenaline and cortisol, which then pumps up your cortisol even more, which then leads to more fat being stored. So if you are highly stressed and you suspect that your cortisol levels might be high, cutting down the caffeine might be a good idea, even if it's just for a while, to see if you don't see a difference. So to wrap it up, remember, if you are struggling with weight around your waist area, it might be a sign of insulin resistance. Unfortunately, insulin resistance isn't as easy to diagnose as just a simple blood test. We need to see clinically the waist circumference and then maybe also do a few blood tests. But typically, if your waist circumference is very high and you are struggling to lose weight, even though you are eating perfectly and you are exercising, you might be suffering from insulin resistance. Now, it's super important to address this, because unfortunately, if we don't address insulin resistance, it might progress onto type 2 diabetes and so forth, which we don't want. So what is the treatment for insulin resistance, you might ask? So first of all, definitely diet. Diet is super important. So what I've mentioned already, make sure your portion sizes are not too big when it comes to carbohydrates, and that you are also focusing on low GI carbohydrates. If you follow the Eat Fit program that is a nutrition doctor, you are safe. It's low GI, and the portion sizes for carbohydrates are a bit on the lower side, so that should be fine. Another thing is then also concentrating on your fat intake, making sure that it's healthy fats from plant sources like avocado, nuts, and seeds, instead of having high saturated fat from your animal products like fat on the meat and so forth, or fatty meat like lamb. And so try to be as active as possible. Even on the days that you're not doing Body 20, try to be active, and to even go for a walk or something like that. And then if you are having a lot of coffee or caffeine drinks, try to cut it down, and try to not have caffeine after 12, maybe in the afternoon, because that also might be affecting your sleep, which is also super important for weight loss and cortisol and insulin resistance, and it all actually works together. So I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions or if you're unsure, please let us know. We're here to help you, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend.